Chechnya. He told President Clinton not to interfere and said that Russia still had a full arsenal of nuclear weapons. Russian forces are reported to be closing in on Charlie, the last rebel stronghold before they reached the Chechen capital, Grozny, 12 miles away. Our special correspondent Ben Brown reports from the Chechen border.
The Chechen rebels may be losing this war, but they're heavily armed, insanely brave, and they're not beaten yet. These pictures were filmed by the Chechens themselves, 25 miles from Grozny. It is propaganda footage designed to show the outside world the rebels are still a force to be reckoned with. They shout out their defiance. Their dream, they say, is an independent Chechnya, free from Russian rule. But Moscow dismisses men like these as Islamic extremists, a danger to the world. Freedom fighters or terrorists, take your pick. Whoever they are, they're prepared to defend Grozny to the death. Close combat fighting is their speciality. For the rebels, the problem is that until now, the Russians have only attacked them from afar, with aerial bombardment and long-range artillery. Moscow's generals, it seems, don't mind destroying vast areas of Chechnya in order to minimize their own casualties. Yet again, Russia's big guns were pounding the rebels today. This footage was taken by Russian television. The Kremlin won't allow Western journalists into Chechnya except on closely supervised visits. Moscow doesn't want too many prying eyes to see the carnage it's creating. But there's no doubt Russian troops are taking more and more territory, advancing even further today. Terrified Chechen civilians emerging from the ruins here in the town of Alkan-Yurt, hoping a white flag will save them from being shot at. This woman escaped across the border from Alkan-Yurt. Lisa Sagareva told me that she and other civilians had been chased out of town by a Russian armoured personnel carrier. We only want to be allowed to go back home, says Lisa, even if we haven't got a house left standing. I'm just fed up of running. Even as she spoke, Russia was pressing on with its offensive, pouring more military hardware and reinforcements over the border into Chechnya. Despite the international pressure, Moscow's generals, it seems, have no intention of ending this war before they're good and ready. They sense they are now close to capturing Grozny, close to victory and close to revenge for the humiliating defeat they suffered in Chechnya 3 years ago. Ben Brown, BBC News on the Chechen border.
President Clinton brushed aside Boris Yeltsin's warning about Russia's nuclear arsenal. He said we can't get too serious about it. Russia insists it will push on with its offensive in Chechnya, despite the increasing criticism in the West. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports on today's row and why Russia is so committed to victory in Chechnya.
Boris Yeltsin is defying illness again. Russia's president is in Beijing, strengthening ties with China. They support Russia's assault on Chechnya, and Mr. Yeltsin scolded President Clinton for daring to criticize Moscow. This was his alarming message to Mr. Clinton personally.
He must have, for a minute, a half minute, a second, forgotten what Russia is. That Russia is equipped with a full arsenal of nuclear weapons. He forgot about this, and so he decided to flex his muscles.
Back in Moscow, that threat was too much even for Boris Yeltsin's Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin. He denied relations with the United States had cooled. And as for Russia's nuclear policy, he said, it exists and will continue to exist. All this left President Clinton eager to diffuse all nuclear talk and try to laugh off the increasingly angry exchanges.
I mean, we can't get too serious about all. Let's not talk about what the leaders are saying and all these words of criticism. Let's focus on what the country is doing.
But why are the Russians quite so touchy about foreign criticism? Mainly it's hurt pride. Russians were feared and respected as a superpower in the Cold War. Now they feel scorned or simply ignored by the West. Kosovo did the most damage to relations. NATO, led by the Americans, bombed Serbia and killed civilians despite Russian anger. As the conflict ended in June, the Russians recovered some pride by racing tanks to Kosovo's capital, Pristina. It was meant to banish the humiliating image of the Russian military as an impoverished force unable to pay and equip its own soldiers. So when terrorists started planting bombs in Moscow this summer, killing scores of civilians, the Russians were convinced they had every right to crush Chechen rebels and keep Russia undivided. The West broadly supports that aim, but certainly not Russia's methods. James Robbins, BBC News.
Scientists in the United States could be about to make one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in history, the creation of a new form of life. They say they've identified the key genes necessary for life to exist and plan to put them together to create a simple organism. But they're asking religious leaders to consider the ethical implications before they go ahead.
This is the first scientist in the world able to create life. Today, at his laboratory in Maryland, Craig Ventus says he now has the ability to build a living organism, gene by gene.
It would be clearly creating a new species that doesn't exist. I think if we could get down to the point of truly understanding and having one of the formulas for life, and you have to understand there's thousands, if not millions, of different formulas. There's not a single formula, but if we could understand one, it would be a profound breakthrough.
To create artificial life, Dr. Ventus' team studied the most simple form of it on the planet, a bacterium known as Mycoplasma genitala. It's made of just 500 genes. Researchers switched off these genes one by one to discover which were crucial to the bug's survival. They discovered only 300 are needed. To confirm this, Dr. Venter wants to artificially create these genes and put them together in the right order. If the result is a living organism, it will be the first time scientists have created life from scratch.
Certainly, if there was ever a moment of time to stop and pause and reflect about the future use of technology, this experiment is it. Because this is a divide into a brave new world, a world in which scientists and companies can begin to create their own genesis, their own creation. My question is this: is anyone wise enough, clairvoyant enough, does anyone among those scientists have the wisdom to believe that they ought to be able to know how best to dictate the future evolution of life on this planet?
Dr. Venter's wife, Claire, is now in charge of the research. She says they realise the full implications of their work, and so they've asked the views of religious thinkers before moving forward.
We've never pretended to have all of the answers, and so we thought that it was important before we went forward to take this research to the next step, that we had an opportunity to get input from bioethicists, from religious leaders, from the public, in fact, to discuss the pros and cons of this kind of work.
Scientists here are poised to create an entirely new form of life. The project will lead to a new understanding of some of the basic processes in biology, but to some, the research is a step too far. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, at the Institute of Genomic Research in Rockville, Maryland.
Interest rates here are to stay unchanged this month at 5.5%. The decision pleased industry and trade unions. But it's thought the Bank of England could be forced to push rates up in the new year if house prices continue to rise quickly. Detectives hunting the killer of Jill Dando have found evidence of obsessive behaviour by a number of men. One wanted to have her telephone number transferred to him. Another wanted to pay her electricity bill. So far, neither man has been traced. It's estimated that 1 in 7 of the world's population goes hungry every day. In large parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the picture is much worse. The United Nations says 40% of the people there are permanently on the verge of starvation. In another in our series on the challenges ahead as we enter a new millennium, David Shukman reports from Malawi in southern Africa on why so many remain trapped by hunger.
Her youngest son has just died in this hospital in Malawi, one of the poorest countries in Africa. Chipiro Malunga was 18 months old. He was a victim of a problem the world has yet to fix: hunger. He died in the malnutrition unit. This is a children's ward where half the children don't leave alive. The chief nurse, Beatrice Kamwana, showed me the worst cases. The talk of fighting hunger means little here.
How old is the child? 1 year, 11 months.
1 year?
Yes.
11 months?
Yes.
The child looks very, very small.
Yes, she looks very small because of the marasmus.
Modeste Chimani lost her child to malnutrition. Like millions of others, her small plot of land only yields enough for 1 meal a day. The world can, in theory, produce sufficient supplies for everyone, but this family, in fact 1 in 7 of the world's population, can't afford to buy the food they need. So they sink into a demoralized existence, hovering between survival and starvation, vulnerable to disease, unable to feel any hope. Modeste says her life is a constant struggle. If she cooks 2 meals on one day, there'll be no food for the next. She dreams of plenty. For years, world leaders have promised that no one should have to go to bed hungry, but these people, with their 1 meal a day, simply aren't getting enough to eat, nor are another 800 million people around the world. Sometimes, of course, the problem is that there's a war or a natural disaster, but for the most part, like here, hunger is a matter of routine. You could call it a hunger trap, and there's no obvious way out. One answer, perhaps, is for the richer countries to be more generous. These sacks, paid for by the World Bank, contain seed, a vital start, but with so many people in need, there aren't enough to go around. The sacks themselves hold another possible solution: new, more productive crops, maybe genetically modified in the future. In the meantime, crops that simply haven't been tried before.
Yeah, soya.
Here they're trying soya. It's highly nutritious. It was introduced by the charity Oxfam. Oxfam's field staff want a package of measures for the richer countries to cancel the debts of the poorer ones and allow fairer trade, also to encourage local solutions.
This is the answer. Local people being trained locally in their own sort of villages, or a couple of villages coming together to be trained by local community workers, training others, training their colleagues, their peers in their own village.
And can that make a difference?
Big difference.
A travelling theatre group acts out the introduction of new techniques in farming. The audience is almost all female. For many experts, the key step to fighting hunger is the education of women.
They make different decisions about how many children to have when they marry. They know more about health and about what their families need. And an educated female population is the single most important thing we can collectively do in order to end poverty and decrease hunger.
An attempt at cheer in the malnutrition unit, but for millions the prospects remain grim. If their poor economies do gather pace, if the richer world shares more of its wealth, if innovations in farming are effectively passed on, there is a chance the world will feed all of its people. But as the body of Chipira Malunga is carried away, and as the millennium approaches, the ancient scourge of hunger is not going to be easily defeated. David Truckman, BBC News in Malawi.
Tomorrow, our final report looks at the damage we've done to the global environment in this century and how we might try to repair it in the next. Here, more jobs are leaking out of the water industry. Hyder, which owns Welsh Water and the electricity company Swalec, is shedding 1,000 jobs. 200 more are going at South West Water. Both companies blamed the job losses on price cuts ordered by the water regulator Ofwat.
Cheaper water at a price. Hyder, which owns Welsh Water and the Welsh power company Swalec, blames utility price reviews for its need to cut 1,000 jobs. That, of course, is of little comfort to Hyder's staff.
I think everybody's doing the best they can to sort it out, and they're counting in staff, and they're giving them opportunities in helping them to look for further employment.
We just hope that once it's all over with after Christmas, that things can pick up a bit really for future.
For the last week, water companies of England and Wales have been responding to the regulator's demand that bills must come down by an average £30 a year. Scotland's water industry is publicly owned, and so it isn't affected. Apart from the 1,000 job losses at Hyder, it was announced today that the South West's water company is shedding 200 staff. Yesterday, Anglian Water said it would reduce its payroll by 400. Yorkshire Water is cutting 500 and Severn Trent is slicing 1,100 jobs. Trade unions want the government to intervene.
Earlier on in the year, we were promised by ministers that price cuts wouldn't be done on the back of job cuts. Now let's see them intervene. I don't think they can wash their hands of this situation.
Certainly the water regulator doesn't see its job as protecting employment.
Companies must become more efficient. How they do that is a matter for them. Customers are concerned with the quality of service they get and the bills they pay, and our job is to protect the interests of customers.
Tomorrow, the North West's water company publishes its latest trading news. This week's toll of job losses may not be over yet. Peter Morgan, BBC News.
A single European defence force of around 60,000 troops that could operate independently of NATO is one of the goals on the agenda when the European Union leaders meet in Helsinki tomorrow. 2 days ago, Baroness Thatcher fiercely criticised the idea. She said that closer military cooperation in Europe would undermine NATO and alienate Britain from the United States.
For 50 years, Europe concentrated on ending past rivalries that created centuries of conflict. But now it's also trying to build a defence system that reflects the continent's future strength and growing togetherness. The Franco-German Brigade, formed 10 years ago, certainly signalled the end of traditional hatreds. Old enemies now train together, here in a combat simulator. But mixing different nationalities in small units is rarely efficient. Critics say the brigade also symbolise what's wrong with Euro defence. Gestures, not true capability. Kosovo revealed the embarrassing truth, with US air power and high technology doing most of the work. And when NATO entered Kosovo, Europe could barely scrape enough troops together to send. Britain did best, but was still badly stretched. Europe mostly spends too little and often not wisely.
When we needed it, the European nations could only get 2% of their forces into the theatre at a time and in a place and in a way that was useful. And what we have to do is to improve that commitment from Europe.
The Eurocorps could be part of the answer. It grew out of the much smaller Franco-German Brigade and now involves 5 nations, although not Britain. Europe's leaders meeting in Helsinki are expected to back a plan promising 60,000 European troops will always be ready to deploy at short notice. More controversially, they'll agree on giving the EU the ability to act if NATO doesn't. For some, like Lady Thatcher speaking this week, it's raised fears of a slippery slope to a European army.
Now, the real drive towards a separate European defence is the same as that towards a single European currency, which I'm against, namely the utopian venture of creating a single European superstate to rival America on the world stage.
France, with its ambivalence towards both NATO and America, causes most worries. The Eurocorps they were instrumental in creating isn't NATO-controlled, but it works closely with the alliance, and the French, British and Germans have emphasised European military action will only follow if NATO doesn't get involved. American politicians such as Bill Cohen are cautiously reassured by the words of leaders like NATO's Secretary General George Robertson.
He and others will insist that what is done to strengthen the European pillar must be seen in the context of strengthening NATO and not inconsistent with it and not divisive.
Kosovo could be an early test. The Eurocorps has offered to take command there, but firmly under NATO control. Proof it says that a stronger European defence won't threaten the alliance. When it was formed, the Franco-German Brigade was more a political symbol than militarily useful. But now its commanders say it's come of age, and that it and the Eurocorps are the spearhead of a truly European force. The challenge now is to prove that, without alienating the Americans or undermining NATO. Mark Leahy, BBC News, with the Franco-German Brigade near the Black Forest.
England's bowlers failed to take advantage of a promising start on the first day of the second test against South Africa in Port Elizabeth. They had South Africa at 146 for 5 at one stage, but let the home side recover to 253 for 6 by the close.
For two-thirds of the day, England's decision to bowl first looked good. Andy Caddick getting them on their way with Kirsten's wicket at 28. Chris Silverwood, returning to Test cricket after 3 years, had already shaken up Callis with a bouncer and beaten for pace again, as an attempted hook only got as far as Caddick. South Africa threw 1 wicket away with a run-out, and then captain Hansie Cronje made it 4 down with another misjudgment against Tufnell. Cullinan repaired some of the damage with a half-century, but when he too lost patience with Tufnell, South Africa were 146 for 5, and England were scenting a rare, dominating day. But the last session belonged to South Africa, with Klusener setting about the job in his typically forthright way. Rhodes also enjoyed the second-string bowlers, and England failed to capitalise on their earlier hard work. Klusener brought up the 100th partnership in style and will return tomorrow unbeaten on 63. Flintoff did get Rhodes out just before the end, but at 253 for 6, South Africa are close to the comfort zone. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
The main news again tonight, Tony Blair's reacted angrily to France's refusal to lift the beef ban. That's the latest BBC News tonight. Good night.
Plagued by rows and delays, the Millennium Dome has been a controversial project. BBC Two in a couple of minutes takes an exclusive look behind the scenes.
Good evening. More than 200 jobs are being lost with the closure of a steelworks in Stoke-on-Trent. The Shelton plant will shut next summer after a century and a half of steelmaking on the site. It'll mean the end of one of the 3 main industries in the potteries. More than 4,000 jobs have been lost in the steel industry over the past 30 years. Our business correspondent Mark Foster reports.
The December gloom settled over Shelton as news of its closure was announced. 216 people will lose their jobs.
We knew something was happening, but nobody thought it would come so soon, I don't think. It's sort of taken everyone with a big shock.
But British Steel, known as Chorus since its merger with a Dutch metal producer, has been making massive losses. There's just too much steel being produced in Europe where the market is poor. Today, Chorus said despite recent price increases, there is no foreseeable prospect of establishing a profitable operation at the Shelton plant. It's the end of a long battle for survival, which started with a reprieve in the 70s, commemorated by this statue and celebrated by a play.
A lot of my family worked there, my wife's family's worked there, and that's true of many, many people in the area. And people remember the red sky at night when the furnaces were tapped. There'll be a lot of sadness in town today, I'm sure.
The closure of Shelton removes the last vestige of steel making in the area, and with it, one of Stoke-on-Trent's industrial pillars.
A doctor who's been accused of subjecting babies to a dangerous experiment has been suspended from duty. Professor David Southall, a consultant paediatrician at North Staffordshire Hospital, is at the centre of an inquiry into his use of an experimental ventilator for premature babies. He's also under investigation for secretly filming mothers suspected of physically abusing their children. A mother and child found dead in their car in Snowdonia yesterday have been named as 26-year-old Claire Woolliscroft and her 3-year-old son Alex from Blythe Bridge in Staffordshire. A post-mortem examination last night concluded they'd died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Detectives aren't looking for anyone else in connection with the deaths. The European Commission will rule within 6 months on whether or not a multi-million-pound rescue package for Rover's Longbridge plant was illegal. In June, BMW promised to spend £3 billion rescuing its loss-making British subsidiary on condition that the government helped out. It's estimated that 9,000 Longbridge jobs and a further 50,000 at associated suppliers depend on it. The Secretary of State for Culture was in Birmingham this evening to reopen the city's Repertory Theatre officially after its multi-million-pound refit. During his visit, Chris Smith was shown around the newly refurbished theatre. He also watched local school children perform their version of Nativity, the play currently being shown at the Rep. And that's it from us. It's our final curtain. Exit stage left. A very good night to you.
We know from our hidden tracking devices that even now Brookside creator Phil Redmond, Labour's Roy Hattersley, Tory Julie Kirkbride, Susan Kramer, Lib Dem hope for London Mayor, and outspoken commentator Bruce Anderson are heading for this secret destination. To find out what they're saying in the back of the car, eavesdrop on Question Time tonight at 11.
Hello there, good evening. Well, some pretty good sunshine today across southeastern parts of Britain, but there's been a lot of showers elsewhere, swirling around an area of low pressure just east of Scotland. They've been coming on that northerly wind right down through the Cheshire Gap into the Midlands, and particularly heavy actually just at the moment across Devon and Cornwall and running along the south coast. But many of them will tend to die away tonight. We'll lose our area of low pressure, that'll tend to pull away eastwards, then we'll see a little nose of high pressure coming in for tomorrow, so many of us enjoying a window of fine weather before the next system rattles into the southwest later on. So tonight then the showers easing back to the western coast. Many inland areas then will become cold. Widespread ground frost across southern parts of Britain and Northern Ireland, and an air frost across northern England and Scotland down to -2 or -3 degrees. It could be a little bit icy too after some of the overnight showers. The day though dawning fine and sunny for many of us. A beautiful start to the day, just 1 or 2 showers around some of these more northwestern areas. But through the afternoon we will start to see some changes. That next weather system bringing cloudier skies and then more general rain into the southwest through the afternoon. And the winds picking up there as well. But temperatures pretty disappointing again, around 6 or 7 for many of us, and staying around freezing over the Highlands of Scotland. And then later on Friday, the winds really do become quite a feature of the weather across the southwest approaches. We'll start to see those westerly winds becoming quite strong, to gale force at times, and they'll be driving in some wet weather for tomorrow evening across many parts of Devon and Cornwall up into the West Country and South Wales. The rain really getting its act together, and then that whole system only slowly pushing its way northwards on Friday night. It's looking pretty nasty actually, some heavy rain, strengthening winds, and even a little bit of wintriness on the northern edge of that, particularly over the Pennines. And then for Saturday we'll get rid of most of the rain across southeastern parts of Britain, but there'll still be a hangback of cloud, rain, even a little bit of sleet and snow over the higher Pennine areas into the southern uplands, but that all should shift away southeastwards during Sunday, and eventually we'll see some clearer, colder and sunny weather coming into the north. That's it for now. Good evening.
I love clowning. I do love clowning.
The idea of bringing dance to an audience through humor was my draw.
Omnibus follows Jennifer Saunders as she tours the world of dance in the search for a new comic character.
Pow, pow! I just love a funny wig and a bit of padding and really silly stuff.
Jennifer Saunders at the Bar, Monday 10:40, BBC One. Omnibus reviews the arts, reveals the person.
They think it's all over in half an hour here on BBC One, but before that it's off to sunny Spain, hopefully.
Is it hot enough for you, Bren?
Oh, I love it. I hope it's like this in Marbella.
Oh, is that where you're going?
Yeah.
Oh, you love it. Me and the wife went 2 years ago.
Shut us down 2 minutes, did you?
We stopped at the British Run Hotel, we drank in the British Owned bar, and we ate at McDonald's. Couldn't fault it.
So you didn't like go around talking to Spanish people or anything?